IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, I'm Megha Pardhi. Today's episode of All Things Policy, we are discussing recently held Quad Summit. On May 24, the fourth Quad Leaders Summit and the second in-person meeting were held in Tokyo. The joint declaration issued after the meeting by leaders of Australia, India, Japan, and the US sought to renew, and I quote here, steadfast commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific that is inclusive and resilient, end quote. So building upon this in-person summit in September 2021 and virtual meeting of Quad leaders in March 2022, the leaders of 4 countries had asserted that Quad is a force for good and they're committed to bringing tangible benefits to the Indo-Pacific. While in the statement, China was not mentioned by name, much of the Quad agenda, as we all know, is reflected the fact that it was designed to meet challenges emanating from China's increased assertiveness in Indo-Pacific. And this has been group's emphasis since the regrouping in 2001. To discuss this outcomes of Quad Summit and some more, today we have us Shrey Khanna. Shrey is my colleague at Takshashila. He's a staff research analyst at the Takshashila Institution. Welcome, Shrey.
Thank you, Megha.
Yeah, so Shrey, can you walk us through outcome of this summit and some key highlights of the summit?
Yeah, so I think in this summit, the focus was on common good, providing common good to the Indo-Pacific. There has been lately a lot of focus on vaccine diplomacy due to COVID pandemic. So this time they talked about the health security, strengthening the health security infrastructure. Then there was talk about how there are unsustainable infrastructure projects. So to fund sustainable infrastructure project in the Indo-Pacific, then there is partnership in maritime domain awareness. There's another common good called as like ostensibly to stop illegal fishing. Then there's talk of bolstering capabilities to respond to humanitarian and natural disasters. And then other than that, there is continuing focus on maritime security, a focus on critical and emerging technology, cybersecurity. So, when in the joint summit, we find that the leaders say that Quad is force for good. So I think this is the kind of good that they are pointing towards, that the commons we can serve together. The second thing is the reaffirmation of ASEAN centrality. The statement, the joint statement, it notes the unwavering support for and practical implementation of the AOIP outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And in this context, there is an obvious point to make vis-a-vis Quad, that it is there for regional stability in the Indo-Pacific, how the security dialogue started. And China is not mentioned, as you pointed out, even though it is one of the biggest actor in the Indo-Pacific. And in this context, ASEAN is mentioned, which points towards that the shape Quad, the regional architecture is taking, in which not only Quad but other countries in the region, they are being prioritized or continue to be prioritized, and it gets enforced that without taking the countries in Southeast Asia together, Quad cannot achieve its goal of a free, open, and prosperous Indo-Pacific. So that is there. These are, I think, some of the main highlights of what do you think?
Yeah, so Shrey, actually, it's good that you mentioned ASEAN centrality. So, see, this is a Quad leaders meeting, but there have been few references to other countries like denuclearization of Korea, Korean Peninsula, and Myanmar, and emphasis on how ASEAN views or importance of ASEAN has been also highlighted in Quad statement a lot. So why do you think Quad leaders felt need to emphasize on ASEAN in their statement? Is there a particular reason, or just because ASEAN is an important actor, as you mentioned, in Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, I think the biggest reason is that ASEAN, even if it is not an important actor, it is seen as important actor by regional countries in Southeast Asia. In fact, the Quad countries combined can sideline ASEAN and talk about China and issues related to China. But the central issue is that these countries are in South China Sea, and some of the problems with instability in the Indo-Pacific is there in South China Sea. So without taking these countries on board, which have placed such a huge emphasis on ASEAN, taking them together through ASEAN, it's very it's quite required to achieve that goal of free, open, and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Other practical thing is that without the support from ASEAN, and much of these countries, they are not ready to talk about China's increased assertiveness like Quad would do. So to take ASEAN along in that Indo-Pacific program, but by also expanding that the nature of the Indo-Pacific program that Quad is dealing with. So giving them place into that Indo-Pacific program without bringing up that sticking points regarding maritime security, in which these Southeast Asian countries will feel disinclined to talk about. So ASEAN Centrality, I think it has been continuing in Quad statement, but to take them together with the Quad, it's important if we have to have a meaningful impact on the Indo-Pacific balance of power.
Interesting. Yeah, so moving on to Quad Fellowship, which has generated a lot of buzz amongst the people and especially youngsters in all of the countries. So this Quad Fellowship is supposed to sponsor 100 students from countries and for a graduate program in STEM fields in United States. And it's supposed to be administered by Schmidt Futures Foundation. So what I wanted to know was from India and even from, I guess, other countries in Quad, students already prefer going to US a lot. So did we really need another fellowship to sponsor students for studying United States, or we needed something which would have increased people to people relations among other members of Quad, like for example, India and Australia or India and Japan, or something like that. So I just want to know your views on this.
I think how I see it is like it's not a matter of need, but about incentivizing people to do such sort of collaboration, which will, especially in a STEM field, which will impact the technology economy, and it will bolster that sort of cooperation between those countries. So and then people to people contact, increasing them. That is another thing. And frankly, I think more fellowships, they don't hurt. It's good for students to have more of them. How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, point is to encourage students to pursue STEM field, not to please just people to be rich. Yeah, that does make sense a lot. So yeah, my next is so there is also this Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness initiative. So of course Quad was not supposed to be, and it's not supposed to be a military alliance, or not it's supposed to be just partnership on other things except military. But there have been some chatter that this Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness could be a step towards, military kind of relationship or military type of an alliance, even though it's
Right.
not on horizon right now, but this could be a step towards it. What do you think about that?
I think it's quite true that it is going to shape in that direction, because what we are talking about, even though we are talking about countering illegal fishing, and when we talk about illegal fishing, China comes to mind, from Guadar protests against China due to illegal fishing to all across the Indo-Pacific till in South China Sea as well. So even though that direct linkage is there, but even more fundamentally, the use of satellite imagery and active intelligence sharing among the member countries, and to have that sort of maritime domain awareness, it will have security implications when countries will be sharing such sort of intelligence. And I think it's very important for Quad to have such capabilities because of China's growing footprint. So I think it's a step in right direction. And how it goes about is that, again, linking it with the common good thing, that it's going to, do good for every Indo-Pacific country, without, talking about the maritime security element of it. So I think it's very, indirectly they are moving in that direction.
Interesting. So looks like this meeting was quite fruitful for India and Quad in general because there's, apart from the things we discussed, there was a range of other initiatives launched, like on climate front, there was Quad climate change adoption and mitigation package. There was also some important discussion on Quad cybersecurity partnership, launch of discussion on first ever Quad Cybersecurity Day. There's also some important discussion on, aligning emphasis on common international cooperation in international standardization organizations, which is again I think has some linkage to China's efforts towards international standardization. There's also talk on quantum technologies, and interestingly, satellite data portal was also launched. Yeah, so in all, it seems like a very fruitful leaders meeting, and of course, apart from that, there were several agreements were also signed between India and other countries. For example, India and government of United States signed an investment incentive agreement, which is kind of a legal requirement for the development finance corporations to continue investment support in India of in critical areas like healthcare and COVID-19. So yeah, this was a very fruitful meeting indeed. So on this note, we'll take a short break and we'll continue after this.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcasts Network. On Shunya One, Sheila Ditya speaks with Sakshi Vij, founder and CEO of Miles Cars, about her entrepreneurial journey. On Cyrus Says Cock and Bull, Cyrus, Sara, Kajol and Antariksh discuss how a passenger with no flying experience lands a plane at the Florida airport. On All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk analyze the state of abortion policy and access in India. On Naan Curry, Sadaf and Archit explore and celebrate indigenous cheese with Dr. Kurush F. Dalal. And on The Habit Coach, Ashton shares tips on how to tackle FOMO. We've got some exciting news for you. IVM Podcasts has just launched its merch, and our first line is out now. Head to the IVM Podcasts website and click on the Shop tab to check out our first collection of t-shirts. Do follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Don't forget to rate us on any platforms you're listening on. You can also check us out on YouTube. We are also doing a small listener survey to better understand how you respond to our shows and advertising on the network. We would really appreciate if you could spare a few minutes to fill it. It helps us build better shows for you. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week: SBI Life Insurance, Jupiter, a digital banking app, and Capgemini. Get the future you want.
Welcome back to All Things Policy. I'm Megha Pardhi. I'm a research analyst at the Takshila Institution. Today, I'm here with my colleague Shrey Khanna, and we're talking about the recent Quad Summit and the future of Indo-Pacific. So before the break, we talked about the outcomes of the summit and some of the key initiatives which were discussed in the summit and announced during announced in Quad statement. So apart from these initiatives in Indo-Pacific, there are several developments which were also discussed during this latest summit. For example, Russia-Ukraine conflict was also on the agenda. And in fact, if I remember, one of the statements of leaders also said that, not the official statement, but statement given to, I think, press also said that the countries seek peaceful resolution and kind of including India. Mentioning that including India was
I think it's part of a joint statement as well.
Joint statement, yeah, but including India has been hesitant so far to, kind of directly condemn Russia. So that was a little surprising. Yeah, so what I wanted to ask was, how did this developments reflect on Quad Summit?
I think firstly, the Quad Summit, it is happening at the time when war is going on in Europe, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So, and Russia is like a traditional rival of the US. And with this Russia-Ukraine conflict, there have been talks that, US will not be in a position to actively balance against China in the Indo-Pacific, or it would not be in a position to focus on the Indo-Pacific. But, even though the war is going on, almost 3 months. But even after that, in this, while it has continued to support Ukraine, the focus on the Indo-Pacific, it remains the US Indo-Pacific strategy. It came out in this period, and now there was the virtual summit in March, and now this in-person summit of the leaders of the four countries. It's happening. So the focus on the Indo-Pacific, that the priority is the Indo-Pacific. I think it is quite evident. Australian elections were just concluded, and within 24 hours, the Australian Prime Minister, he attends the new Australian Prime Minister. He attends the Quad Summit. So the importance of the Quad, it gets highlighted, and importance of the Indo-Pacific and the geostrategic imagination of these leaders, it is also highlighted. Yeah, so that is that thing. And when the summit was going on, Japan said that Russia and China, they undertook that military exercise. So I think yesterday Japan also put out the photos of Russian and Chinese bombers there. So that sort of thing has also happened. And I think for India, it can become a sticking point, because India likes to see China as a separate actor from Russia, but the growing alignment, the reality of the growing Russia-China alignment, and how it potentially poses problem for India in a conflict with China on LSC, that part, India would have to acknowledge and plan accordingly. Other thing is for India is that as the global impact of war has shown, that the idea that a European war would have no consequences for the Indo-Pacific, I don't think it holds true now, because of the such global disruption in energy prices, commodity prices, supply chains. So that sort of thing is also India would have to, take in mind, that how to approach this growing alignment between Russia and China. And I think in a related context about Taiwan, there was that Taiwan controversy after President Biden's statement whether U.S. policy towards Taiwan has changed. So, and because we are focusing on Indo-Pacific, and Taiwan is such a big sticking point that the mention of Taiwan will come up eventually. I think India would feel increasing pressure to eventually formulate how it is going to behave in an event of crisis, because as the Quad's footprint in the Indo-Pacific increases, India would have to eventually take a position on Taiwan. In more words, because if you see a Ukraine war, if you see India's response in the Russia-Ukraine war, it kind of muddled through not planning what to do if war breaks out in Europe. Fortunately, right now, India's position in an increasingly multipolar world order makes it kind of indispensable. But in such an event of crisis, there may be an opportunity or problem which will come with it, with this increased power, and which may, if not, this is the thing which India needs to plan for. But Megha, you and Manoj published a research document on Taiwan early this year. So how do you see India's choices in this Taiwan controversy?
Yes, so India, I mean, of course, officially India does adhere to one China policy. And India has been reluctant to name China directly in even in Quad statements, because among Quad countries, India is the only one with border dispute, and very active and volatile border dispute with China. So of course, our steps are going to be very measured. But you see, if what we can see is that India is trying to increase their cooperation with Taiwan, and even people-to-people exchanges. So our engagement overall with Taiwan has increased a lot over the last few years. And of course, that is because we're trying to kind of, I would say counter China, but yeah, China is a factor in this relationship. But apart from that, I mean, if you also set aside Taiwan for a moment, I think that how China viewed Quad is also important because initially they just thought this was fad, and now they have started to take Quad very seriously. I mean, Joe Biden during the summit also said that this is not just a passing fad, but it means business. And from initially, so China has kind of come to full circle and realize that India will be part of Quad, and Quad is a real, very real and serious thing. So, you can see that the reaction reflects they are worried about Quad and India's position there. I mean, Wang Yi he announced his visit to South Pacific nations because and China's activity in Solomon Island recently, that intergovernment pact which they did with Solomon Islands. So all these kind of are indications that China is worried about activities of Quad countries in Taiwan, Indo-Pacific, and in general. So yeah, but yeah, there is this one thing which you mentioned and it reminded me, which we had, Manoj and I had, outlined in our document that initially we had proposed that due to Ukraine war, focus of United States and Western countries in general might shift from Indo-Pacific to Europe. But this summit kind of, it felt like US and other countries are trying to reassure countries in Indo-Pacific that that's not going to be the case. Indo-Pacific will be a priority even if there are other conflicts going on. And I think Joe Biden's statement on Taiwan also reflected that.
Right. I think one thing that is a point of concern is that the resources that US is going to, invest in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, if they could have been, diverted to the Indo-Pacific, that would have been better. But other than that, I think US's focus on the Indo-Pacific is likely to remain in the foreseeable future as well.
That's a good point, but I think what's going on in Ukraine is a full-fledged war.
Yeah.
And in Indo-Pacific, fortunately, we don't have that. So I don't think resources are a matter of concern. It was just, I think, matter of effort and, prioritizing a region. Yeah, that's it. But so even after that, as I said, Quad continues to be an area of importance, not just for US, but also for other countries. So of course, there are bound to be some developments in future. So for example, I think there's talk about Quad Plus arrangements. And interestingly, Quad leaders' statement mentioned denuclearization of Korean Peninsula and Myanmar also. So do you think this was designed to, I don't know, attract attention of ASEAN countries plus even South Korea, or this was something hinting towards expansion of Quad? What do you think? Or what do you think are the further developments that we should watch out for?
I think the mention of Myanmar or North Korean issue in Quad statement or the discussion about that, it shows that Quad is becoming sort of a place, a forum between these countries where they are going to talk about the security, the prominent security issues in the Indo-Pacific. It is good because to generate a better response from the Indo-Pacific countries, it will be important to talk about the issues which matter to them. So that is important. But the talk about Quad Plus, I think what we are seeing is that it's not a direct expansion of Quad per se, but using Quads, the fora of Quad to bring more countries in. So, for example, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, if you see, there is Quad and then there is 8 other countries in the region: South Korea, Malaysia, New Zealand, or Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. So Brunei, Indonesia. So these countries are there, and the framework is structured around 4 pillars, which again you can think of it as a common good. But it talks about trade. Now China is the largest trading partner for many of these countries. Supply chain, how to make them more resilient and integrated. It indirectly it is still connected to the concern with China. Then infrastructure, it talks about deepening cooperation on technologies, on mobilizing finances, providing concessional finance. So the funding sustainable and durable infrastructure. Then this point again, is related to the BRI investments and the concerns related to that, the high rate of interest which China has offered for some of the projects under BRI. And then the anti-corruption thing, it is to support capacity building and to advance accountable and transparent system in the Indo-Pacific countries. So the IPEF, when it is bringing these countries together, it is bringing these countries together, and they are going to work together on and to provide economic part of that, the architecture, that political architecture that the Quad countries are trying to build. So that is, and then there's the agreement on MDA that is there, that is doing the same thing on maritime domain awareness. So what we are seeing is that it's not expansion of Quad. Maybe South Korea will come in. South Korea has definitely shown, inclination to be part. But broadly, if you see the Indo-Pacific, I think Quad Plus framework is distant. However, there's the unveiling of the expanded Indo-Pacific program, which will be spearheaded by Quad countries. I think it suggests that regional political architecture is being shaped in the Indo-Pacific.
Interesting. So, there is a possibility. So, I think in one of the earlier episodes we did with Brendan, he also mentioned that a formal kind of structure is not on horizon. That was, not on horizon as of now for future of Quad and Indo-Pacific, but there will definitely be some more engagement. Yeah, so thank you so much, Shrey, for joining me today. This was a very interesting discussion, and I'm glad that we took this topic up.
Thank you, Megha, for having me. It was a nice discussion on Quad and the Indo-Pacific.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
Do you find yourself in a room full of people talking about investments and insurances and feel left out? Do you also want to understand how to spend your money wisely? Then you have come to the right place. Welcome to SBI Life Presents A Sip of Finance, a women-exclusive podcast where we break down difficult financial topics into simple and straightforward episodes with your host, Priyanka Acharya, a finance expert who's been in the industry for 14 plus years. And not just in English, but in 7 more languages. So tune in every Tuesday for fresh episodes on the IVM Podcast Network and all major podcast streaming platforms.